Wow. Well, it is
Beautiful.
about that time. It is the top of the hour, and we are moving into our next pillar of action. So well, yeah, next pillar of action,
From
next
action.
pillar of impact, from action to accountability. And it's a word I'm well familiar with as
Yes.
a lawyer. It's a lot of all of what we talk about. But as we begin the accountability hour, we actually really wanted to highlight the partner organizations that we are raising funds for in this first phase of our work, including 100% of the funds that we raised through today's event. As we spoke about earlier, these are two organizations that we feel so deeply and personally connected to because they're deeply personal to us and our stories as survivors. And so again, 100% of the funds that we raise today go to these two organizations, and they go directly to the emergency services for survivors that both Saki for South Asian survivors and the YWCA Metropolitan Chicago provide for survivors. And part of our work is this vulnerability first phase of what we're doing is to create an anonymous reporting system for survivors on the mountains, which doesn't exist yet, which is a huge need.
A very big need.
At Saki, funds raised will go directly to their emergency assistance program for survivors, which will directly bolster their ability to provide essential services that help survivors navigate their immediate needs when leaving abusive environments. At the YWCA Metropolitan Chicago, all funds raised will support their rape crisis hotline, sexual assault counseling, and crisis intervention training programs, all of which face debilitating resource constraints. In fact, just $100 will provide a survivor with a counseling session at the YWCA Metropolitan Chicago.
And right now, there is a 9-month wait for survivors to receive counseling.
So we actually do have a little QR screen we're going to put on this QR code we're going to put on the screen. Wow, tripping over my words now. If you feel called to contribute further to these amazing projects, we've included a QR code on the screen. But we just want to actually highlight, even as we do so, that just by being here, you've already made a huge difference for survivors in finding their own path to step into their inherent power. So thank you. We can take that down now because excitingly and importantly, we have the amazing Kavita Mehra with us today. She is the executive director of Saki for South Asian Survivors. I'm sorry I'm looking this way, Kavita. I know the camera is here, but you are here. So I want to make sure it looks like we are looking at you.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. No, that's totally fine. This is an interesting perspective, but I really like it. So I have both of your beautiful profiles as I am having this conversation with you.
I'm going to keep trying to put it a little bit over here. Okay?
The screen to here.
It's good. You're going to keep.
Barrymore style where we're just like comfortable and just sitting on
No, this is great. And I really loved the intro, and Shruti was awesome. I just took the red eye in from LA. And so like that was the perfect grounding for this conversation.
I'm so happy that you got to.
Yeah, I was totally happy to even just meet you guys in the city, but this is amazing. Thank you so much for uplifting our work, and being part of this conversation was super important to me. So I didn't want to miss that.
We really appreciate you. I know you came in on the red eye, and I was like, oh my God, she's sure. It's like, she's sure she wants to come in person like this. If this was a virgin.
Totally fine.
Totally fine. Really happy to have you. It's really such an honor. And if you don't mind, I'm going to do a brief reading of your bio, and then gonna
sure go for it.
Further as we learn. Okay. We are all so multi-sectional, and we are all multi-hyphenates. And I feel like there's so much more than just what is in your bio. So I'm going to read that and then turn it over to you. So for those who are watching, Kavita is an intersectional feminist committed to advancing economic, gender, racial, and survivor justice. She first joined Saki, and I love this story, first joined Saki as an intern in 2002 during her third year at university, driven by a passion for dismantling systems of oppression and supporting marginalized communities. Inspired by her early experiences, Kavita aspired to lead the organization, and in June 2017, she became Saki's 6th executive director. Under Kavita's leadership, Saki has embraced a more inclusive and intersectional approach, culminating in just this year a name change to completely embody this essential shift in focus. And during your tenure, Kavita, the organization has grown by over 800% and expanded its services to include a trauma-informed mental health program, a housing program, and a food justice initiative, all programs designed to address the complex interwoven needs of survivors. Kavita's deep commitment to building a survivor-centered, anti-racist movement led to the opening of Sakhi's second office in Queens in March 2020, and a third office in Brooklyn in 2023. And her leadership has been instrumental in guiding Sakhi through multiple crises, the COVID pandemic, ensuring that critical life-saving services reached survivors in New York City while maintaining the organization's financial stability and growth. We are so honored to have you here. It sounds like a lot, and there's so much more that I couldn't even say.
No, don't. It's wildly uncomfortable. Sorry.
No, receive it. This is what we're learning
today. You want to see a brown person blush? It's going to happen in about 5 seconds, so please don't.
Well, what did I miss? That's my first question to you. I would love to start with just if you give a brief introduction of yourself, how you came into your leadership role at Sakhi. I love that story. And a very quick answer to the question, what is your why?
And thank you both again for having us. And it's such an honor, and I love what you're doing. And just this whole, even just the use of the word power in this way is just, it resonates so much of how we think about the work at Sakhi. I grew up working class in New Jersey. My class identity is a huge part of how I think about the work, and how I reconcile my own life, quite frankly. And I'm a survivor of violence. And I remember in the earliest and darkest moments of my life, I knew that I needed to, one, get out of my parents' house, and two, I needed to do something with my life. I wanted purpose. When I was doing a study abroad program in London, my second year of university, I learned about South Hall Black Sisters. And I never had the opportunity to visit it, but then I continued to do research. And when I came back to New York, a lot of the ethos that was at South Hall Black Sisters was at Sakhi. And I was like, I really want to be part of this organization. It sounds incredible. And when I was an intern, I did everything from accompanying survivors to doctor's appointments, to actually attending our gala. And when I was at our gala, I turned to my partner, who's now my husband, and I said to him, I want to be the next Purvi Shah, who was our former executive director. And he said to me, you're going to be the next Kavita Mehra. And I knew, I fell in love with this role way before I even got it. I applied for the job twice. And then the first time I didn't even get an interview, the second time they offered me the position. And I wholeheartedly said yes, because I knew it was the role of a lifetime. And it's brought me so much healing. It's given me so much. It's hard for me to sometimes talk about it, but it's been the most incredible opportunity of my career, to be able to serve the community. And so the why question is a really interesting one, because I've been unpacking so much of that with my therapist, and wow, I'm getting really raw here. And so I hate this word, because I think it's so laden with the carceral system, but so much of my work has been really centered around justice. Not accountability, but just what does justice look like for a survivor? And that feels like a really personal thing. Because survivorship, even those who don't disclose their experience of violence, right, they are still a survivor, and we will never know that, because they're cloaked in the pain of it. And the shame that's displaced onto them. But what does justice look like? And for me, I'm just working through that idea, trying to figure out what justice could be for me, and then those in my orbit who have experienced harm. It's sort of been the through line and sort of my why, I think. And that's just something I've been recently sort of unpacking.
I love that. And, beautiful. As a lawyer, the word justice kind of immediately brings one thing to mind, right? And it's something that it's oh my gosh, as a survivor, that's not really what justice looks like. And so this question of what does justice really look like? How can we remove it from this context of, the legal system? Because it's so much
Yeah.
more than that. And it is necessarily so much more than that.
Yeah. Because I feel like justice is different from accountability,
Mhm.
because justice is holding someone accountable. So it's action plus healing in my mind.
Yeah.
Right. And so like that's the distinction. And I knew accountability wasn't my why. It wasn't enough for me, but because I need the healing component to it. Um, and accountability just doesn't offer that. So yeah, justice is a problematic word for many people, even myself, but I think that's actually my word.
Yeah, I really love that. So I come from a little bit different background in somatic trauma therapy.
Mm,
And something that I always, that I personally feel and that I work with many survivors. And, there's this underlying that my healing is my justice. And that
mm.
looks different to so many people.
Yeah,
I do
precisely.
think that, accountability can be a part of that, but also just that depth of healing that you can have inside can be your own personal justice as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which is a
Uh-huh.
reason why we have planned this event for this month. But I want to break that down with you.
Yeah.
So could you tell us what is domestic violence
Mm.
from your
Yeah.
perspective? And from
Yeah,
yours?
yeah. So domestic violence is any form of violence that happens within the domestic space. And that can, in the, particularly in the community that we work with, it manifests in a host of different ways. So yes, it includes intimate partner violence. It also includes in abuse that, or violence that one has experienced as a result of their in-laws. It, it can often include, or it has included in our experience, like caste-based abuse. It has included religious-based abuse. It has included parental abuse, and then it's also included elder abuse and violence that's been experienced by young people. So it's really, but it's within the container of the domestic space. Often, when folks are thinking about gender-based violence, they're typically thinking about GBV. Sorry, they're thinking about DV. But it's really GBV is much broader than that, which I know we're going to unpack in a few minutes. And then obviously, like it also includes sexual violence that happens within the domestic space too. But it is an umbrella term that's used for any form of violence that happens within a domestic sphere.
When you say form of violence, I also kind of want to unpack that a little bit too. I think a lot of people have this conception that it's purely physical. And I just
Mhm.
wanted to ask you a little bit about that. How has violence manifested in the work that you've seen in communities?
The way that we think about violence is any form of power and control that's been used to inflict on another individual. And so the manifestations that we often completely agree, right? Think about are physical form. However, it can also look like emotional abuse. It can look like verbal abuse. It can look like mental abuse. It can look like financial abuse, which we see overwhelmingly in the community that we work with. It can look like immigration related abuse, which we also see, right? Like, so those who are engaging in harm will often hold like one's documentation, preventing them from being able to like move forward with healing as a form of power and control. And, these forms of violence often are intersecting at different times and within the scope of a relationship. So it's not just one thing often, but it's any form of power and control over onto another person.
Yeah. So this feels like it's a really big problem. Why are we not talking more about this? Why is there this kind of just blanket, let's talk about it for a month and then we're going to go 11 months until we talk about this again?
Yeah, yeah. Or maybe if we're lucky, we'll talk about Women's History Month or AAPI Month.
Yeah.
Right. So like we get the 3 months of the year, and Sexual Assault Awareness Month isn't even fully appreciated in April. I was having this conversation with someone last night, and I was saying, I know more people in my life who are survivors of violence than more people in my life who have had cancer. It is the number one social justice issue in my mind for the South Asian Indo-Caribbean community. 48% of South Asian Americans have experienced gender-based violence. Exactly. Nearly 50% of us. That means if one of us has not experienced it, someone we know has experienced it, right? That is a staggering statistic. If we had the same statistics around cardiovascular diseases, there would be a march every day in Edison, in Jackson Heights, in Long Island, and everywhere else we live, saying we need to figure out what's happening. Why are so many people having a heart attack? Why aren't we figuring out what's happening about the fact that half of our community is experiencing violence? Why are we not mobilizing around this? That is a great question. I think it's because there's a tremendous amount of shame. And as the movement has evolved, and listen, I am incredibly grateful for the individual who started the South Asian feminist movement in the United States. And I think because for a long time, our work did not hold space for all survivors of violence, we were inadvertently perpetuating toxic masculinity. Right? We were not recognizing that a survivor is a survivor is a survivor. That experience of trauma can be held across any gendered identity, any sexuality. And ultimately, we have to see a person for the pain that they've experienced and clear the pathway toward their healing. That is our responsibility as a community. And so, like, a long-winded way of answering this question is that I don't think that we have fully understood or fully come together at how pervasive the issue is. And I think for a really long time, the movement has alienated survivors, and it's our responsibility to sort of shift that. But I always argue that is the number one social justice issue that threads across the South Asian community in the United States.
That's almost 1 in 2. Just you saying that statistic, I know I said wow, and then I got really emotional because that is a hard statistic. And maybe this is part of the thing too, is it's a hard statistic to wrap your head around.
Exactly.
Many survivors, that many people who have experienced violence, who have experienced harm in our community. It's our moral imperative to step in and provide and be there and support each other and even just talk about it.
And I don't think it's, and to take this one step further, it is not because our community is more violent, right? No community is violent, right? It is our community has become really adept at intergenerational trauma and silencing and shaming, right? Like those 3 things working in an ecosystem together have perpetuated violence. It is not because no one comes from a more violent stock, right? Like I fundamentally cannot believe that. But it is because of the impact of just silencing and shaming and that building over generations of time that ultimately, like, this has become normed. Like, oh yeah, of course, that's fine. Whatever, just turn your eye. No, that's not normal. That's not okay. It's never okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you explain to us what the relationship between domestic violence and gender-based violence from your perspective?
Yeah. So domestic violence, as I mentioned, is sort of like what happens in the domestic sphere. Gender-based violence is a more broader term that is any form of violence that one experiences as a result of their gendered identity. That could happen at the individual level, it can happen at the communal level, and it can happen at the systems level. And we're seeing that play out in the United States, quite frankly, in real time, right? What's happened in repo rights? That's at the state level, guys. The fall of Roe, that's the state level. What's happening in the anti-trans legislation, that's gender-based violence sanctioned at the state level, right? Like all of this is part of the same ecosystem. We're just not talking about it that way. And so gender-based violence can also include forms of violence that can happen with an individual you might not know, right? So especially if it's at the individual level, it can happen outside of the scope of intimate partner violence. It can happen at the community level, right? Where one is experiencing direct violence. We don't see that as much, I would say, in the US as we might see it more in the global South, particularly around forms of sexual violence or periods of war. But that is sort of how one can conceptualize and think about it, right? GBV is that broader umbrella term. And that's what we typically lean into at Sucky.
Yeah. Well, thank you for breaking that down.
Yeah,
I mean,
thank you.
look, the lawyer in me loves the semantics and the definitions. Actually, this is a question that we didn't have on the list, but what you were just talking about made me really kind of think about this. Is you talk about gender-based violence as this umbrella term, and then there are all of these different terms that fall under that, right? We talk about domestic violence, we talk about reproductive justice and reproductive violence, we talk about trans rights and trans violence against trans people. How where is it helpful to have these different definitions, and where can it be perhaps harmful to have all of these myriad definitions and different kind of categories and silos almost?
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, if something comes up for me for the harmful piece, but in terms of like how it's helpful, I think what we need to be able to remember is that like when one holds an identity, are you seeing their gender first? Are you seeing their class identity first? Are you seeing their race first? That ultimately, like are you seeing how they present, right? So, like what are you seeing first, right? Like how are they engaging with the world? And so the silos can be somewhat difficult to navigate through, but I also think that we have to come into this work understanding that like people are holding multiple identities. And GBV can often be a through line through all of those experiences, right? And so I don't think that we can talk about racial justice without talking about class and gender. I don't think, and vice versa, right? Like I don't think that that's fundamentally possible. And I think oftentimes, especially, and we see this a lot in with our philanthropic partners, right? They're solely focused on immigrant justice. They're solely focused on racial justice. They're solely focused on one thing. But ultimately, it is not the one thing that's going to solve the issue, or it's not one thing that we can invest in. And while I realize I just like made an argument to call out gender survivor justice as its own piece and its own ecosystem, which I know we'll unpack, I don't think that it's getting the ultimate. I don't think survivors are getting the ultimate platform and space that we truly deserve in terms of recognizing the resources that are needed for our community. I mean, for individuals who have experienced trauma.
It's this like
I don't know if I fully answered your question. I'm sorry.
well, I think it did. I mean, look, it's how do we find this balance between naming identity is so important, right? Because each of us has such a unique identity and we need to honor that. And that's really important. And from like a resources perspective and an organization perspective, it is also important to focus on certain, silos, if you will, but certain identities. That's important, right? Because how do you create specific projects, answer specific needs, respond to those things? And I think it's an end, right? And it's important to then collaborate and understand that there are these other identities, these myriad identities that all are interwoven into this problem. And how can, okay, there's an organization that's working on racial justice issues. I'm an organization that's working on gender-based violence or survivor justice specifically. How can we connect and figure out, together, okay, let's tackle this from a different perspective, maybe. So yeah, I think you absolutely, I mean, I don't know.
Oh,
You answered the question. So helpful. And yeah, speaking, I mean, we've touched on this a little bit, but speaking of definitions, oh my gosh, I'm the definition person today. You mentioned this too, right? Gender-based violence is expansive, right? And the way that we understand gender is also expansive. And your piece talked about how the survivor justice movement really needs to be also inclusive and expansive. And, I just was wondering if you could speak a little bit to that. First, why is current discourse surrounding gender-based violence so narrow? And second, what needs to be done to kind of ensure that individuals, survivors of all identities and all gender identities can be a part of this movement?
I'll give you some context to that piece. So I'm an individual who, two things about me, right? I love hip hop. And I also am someone who is often compelled to act out of anger, not rage, but anger. And I think anger can be really productive. And so this summer, there were so many things that were happening in the world. What was happening in Bangladesh, what was happening in the Middle East, what was happening in the UK, all of that was really impacting the community that we serve. And then on top of that, like amazing, great Harris taking over in terms of like where she stands in terms of now running for president, which is incredible and historic. And there has been a more active conversation around women and girls. Absolutely critical. But what I didn't hear consistently was where are survivors in any of this. And so like part of what I was thinking a lot about over like for the end of the summer, and I was listening to a podcast by one of like the country's leading philanthropists who's investing in women and girls, talking about her investment in women and girls. And I was thinking about all of the survivors that are in Saki's orbit, who for so long did not see themselves as part of Saki because we only framed our work as women and girls. And then I thought about all of the survivors in my life who don't identify as a woman and girl, but have been essentially silenced by a movement because they have no space to come forward, but their trauma is equally as palpable and real. And it does not have a distinction based on their gendered identity. And so we ultimately need to create a space where a survivor can come forward to access healing. And that's it, period. Right? Like, and it should not matter what their gendered identity is. What matters is that a person is looking for healing, and they find a community to be able to go through that process. And so the piece was written, both of the pieces were really written with that mindset. And Saki's been going through this evolution for quite some time now. This name change started, I mean, the genesis to it was really back in 2019 when we published strategic plan, and we said very clearly that all survivors are welcome at Saki. A survivor is a survivor is a survivor, and we've held true to that, and we've been working towards a major culture shift. But I think that, we have to create a space and a movement, and there needs to be an ecosystem where we can talk about gender-based violence without specifically having it connected to a gendered identity. Because the statistics are not the same everywhere for every form of violence, right? Intimate partner violence within cis hetero relationships looks very different from, let's say, child sexual abuse in the global South. And who experiences those forms of violence based on their gendered identity looks very different. But those experiences are forms of gender-based violence. And in our current discourse, the person from the global South who is experiencing CSA, who might be male identifying or who is male identifying, even though there's 52% of boys experience CSA in India versus 49% of girls, boys don't have a place to go for healing, right? Like, I mean, this is the current setup. This is where, because all we're doing is talking about women and girls, right? And so we're not talking about healing. And so I think the conversation of women and girls is critically important. Absolutely. But I don't think that we have to, I think we can build more. Yeah. I would like us to be a bit bolder and more expansive. And the conversation of, and the experience of gender-based violence allows for us to create a more inclusive ecosystem across all gender expressions and all sexualities.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, again, this is me being just such a lawyer right now. But it's like, but coming from an international law background, it's been really encouraging as well to see, the ICC prosecutor, Office of the Prosecutor put out their gender policy and really explain what is gender. Gender is expansive. And so everything that we talk about when it comes to gender persecution, that's expansive. That's not just, we're not just talking about women and girls here. We need to look at this as a gender inclusive, overall inclusive, from them it's prosecutor perspective, but it's still gender inclusive. And so from that, I've been really kind of encouraged to see the law, at least, and people in the international law space take that step to be more inclusive. So I'm just nerding.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like it's it's an incredible, um, it sounds like folks have been reading Butler. I just wish that folks in philanthropy have been reading Butler. You know, um, unfortunately, we're not there yet. So,
Yeah,
but you're right, right? So gender is a social construction, right? Like once we can wrap our mind around that, what we really need to be talking about is how are we creating equity and healing? How are we ensuring we're not creating a system that's creating also harm by silencing people?
absolutely. I mean, that feels like the perfect segue for you to tell us about survivor justice movement, that you
Yeah.
called for. What does that look like? Like, what does that look like? And then what is your vision? What would your ideal kind of next year look like from the survivor justice movement perspective?
Um, from a organizational perspective, I think one of the things that's always been really important to me is continuing to center um, those who have experienced violence in the decision making. We are survivor led and survivor centered, and it's such an incredible part of our ethos. And so, how do we create an organization where members of the community are leading us? And that's part of it, right? Um, Within the broader ecosystem of the GBV movement, I think it is a real shift around how we talk about gender-based violence. I think there's got to be a separate um, pool of funding specifically for survivors of violence. There was a recent report that said that only 2% of philanthropy, 1.8% of philanthropy goes to women and girls, and somewhere between 100 and 150 million globally goes to GBV.
Oh my gosh.
Which feels
Yeah, but you said
like a slap in the face, and it tells survivors of violence that we don't matter. And then and the way that the current ecosystem in the US is set up is because VAWA is, for all of its things, that it has unlocked a tremendous amount of government funding. However, it has also prevented, I think it's really put a ceiling on how philanthropy thinks about gender-based violence, right? Because so many gender-based violence organizations are reliant on government funding. So really thinking about philanthropy stepping up. And then I think we need to shift language, right? I think we need to be more inclusive, using non-gender language when we talk about someone who has experienced violence, creating safety, recognizing that all members of our community can experience violence. And creating a safe space around that. I think all of those things are part of an ecosystem. I was recently at a conference in September at the Ford Foundation, and it was specifically focused on GBV, and it was segmented, actually, Anjali, to your question, right? Like earlier, like there was a full section on what does anti-trans legislation look like, and breaking that down for the GBV movement. But then it was also talking, and then but most of the conversation was on women and girls and gender-based violence. And the only time in which it allowed for, or it had a significant portion of like including individuals who identify as men, was actually just in the scope of allyship or partnership or in solidarity. Like it's moments like that we're bringing together some of the leading minds in the survivor justice movement. And here we are not creating a space for all survivors. Like there is something inherently wrong with that. So that's why I think like language matters, yes, and how we think about the movement and recognizing who is a survivor and creating space for those individuals.
Yeah. And how do we, what proportion of our time, as you said, how much are we really, is it just to say that, you know, okay, we've got one, let's have one out of 100 panels be focused on non-women and girls. Like, you know, it's how do we apportion our resources and things as well, and our time and what we're thinking about and how we think about it. So what I'm hearing from you is this this complete shift in thinking is, well, we're not thinking about this from a gendered lens anymore. We're thinking about it from a survivor lens. We're thinking about it from a healing lens. And how do we come at it from that way rather than coming at it from this gendered perspective?
You know, like I was an organizer for a period of my life at the Taxi Workers Alliance, and this was immediately after 9/11. And many of the drivers that we were working with are from South Asia, and many of the drivers that we work with, like, were targeted, right, shortly after 9/11. And it was a tremendous amount of racial discrimination. And at that moment in my career, and even today, I could not erase the fact that there was a gendered component to that, right? Like there was a fear of brown men in this country post 9/11 because of the trauma that, like, the US had experienced. And there was a backlash. And you know, I think we can't separate either identity, right? And so brown men, for their maleness, right, for like the foreignness, the idea of I'm not going to use the word, but I think we all know the word I'm talking about, of, like, you know, those who engage in like sort of these horrific acts. There was a conceptualization of them, and it was perpetuated by media. It was perpetuated by TV shows like Law and Order. It was perpetuated across everywhere. And it was because of their brownness, and it was because of their male identity. And I don't think that we can separate race and gender and class for that matter, right? And so we're at the moment where I think we can do a better job, and we can also level up in how we're thinking about this work and the movement. And like, it does feel like we can, we're at an inflection point where we can grow.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important. And it's kind of this thing where it's like, theoretically, I think everyone gets it. And it's, you know, and it's okay, yes, let's have this conversation. That's really important. And then how to implement programs that actually honor and reflect what we're talking about, right? How you know, what does that look like? You know, what programs can organizations put into practice? You know, changing language, yes, and understanding, okay, in theory, yeah, okay, I understand. What does a program shift look like?
And we just went through several years of it, you know. And so the first was, I mean, we had to do across our team, across our board, across our stakeholder base, really doing a tremendous amount of investment on like why this shift is so critically important, why a deeper understanding of survivorship needs to be engendered across Saki. That was foundational for us to do a programmatic shift. But actually, you know, like, because then we had many conversations around this, right? Like, because a survivor is a survivor is a survivor, we don't do programming that's gender specific.
Yeah.
Except for now, we do have programming that is language specific. We do have programming that is specific to one's sexual identity. But not around one's gendered identity. Because we did not want to create that barrier. We wanted to create a sense of community and healing. And so we do have folks who identify across the gender spectrum, participating in all of our programming. And I think when we started to become more active in our voice around being a more encompassing organization is when we saw an uptick of young folks reaching out to us too. So we work with survivors starting at the age of 6. And it was after the pandemic, and then especially more recently, like young folks who are across like uh like who are particularly who are trans or like queer will reach out to Saki because they see Saki as their home, as a safe place, and because there aren't many other resources for them, and they are experiencing forms of violence, often because of their sexuality or gendered identity too.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness. Well, what you do is just so critical and so important.
Yeah.
I guess I have a question that is just, we feel this very deeply personally. But this idea of shame and stigma, and you mentioned it a few times at the beginning of our conversation as a tool of silencing survivors, as a, potentially, a way that abusers maintain power over survivors, and a real problem. And I guess I was wondering, from your perspective, how do we start to chip away at this shame, at this stigma? What is that? How do we do that?
At the cultural level, I think we have to keep shining light on the fact that like it is a pervasive experience. And I think the more that individuals feel comfortable sharing, like actually I am someone who has witnessed it, I have experienced it, and really like breaking the barriers behind the wall of how hidden gender-based violence can be, that experience of violence, right? It's often, especially like a one-to-one in close quarters. But I also recognize that's really hard to do for individuals, because there is a tremendous amount of shame and stigma attached to it. But the more that we can continue to even just lean into the fact that it is a pervasive issue in our community. And nobody needs to ever sort of disclose their trauma. We would never advocate for that. But there is power in being able to say their connection to like one's connection to the movement, right? There is power in that. I think that eradicates something. And the uniqueness of my position is that individuals often will disclose to me in really private settings, who are like on the public face of things, incredibly well accomplished, and it doesn't take away their accomplishments. But they are coming to me as a private source to explain, like, or to share their experiences of violence. That in itself is a big act. Investing in organizations like Saki, there are 40 versions of Saki across the U.S., which is pretty incredible. But I think the more that we can advocate and actually not feel uncomfortable with saying, yes, I too have experienced it. I think what Tarana did with Me Too was incredibly powerful, right? And to that effect, yeah.
Absolutely. And I really, I hear and I feel that community that you create, where shame doesn't necessarily, I always think of, community and safe places and places where people get to be vulnerable. That's where shame goes to die. And I mean, if you look at it, like, even with, like you said, the story doesn't matter. It's, if you look at Me Too, if you look at AA, if you look at any sort of addiction recovery, um, these are groups, these are supportive communities that you can go and just be a part of and resonate even with the message. And that's that chipping away at shame over and over, because what shame likes to do is isolate us, versus community likes us to lean in and feels that safety and that we're not alone, which
Yep.
shame likes us to feel alone. So
Yep.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
create that space.
Yeah, exactly. It's never easy for an individual to even just disclose or say, like, one is a survivor of violence, right? It's never, ever easy. It is often like saying I'm a survivor is sometimes the three hardest words I ever have to say, right? And also, I recognize that it, it opens up a space for other individuals to be able to say, like, I can share my thing too. I like what happened to me because it was so private. Like I wasn't alone. Like I'm not going crazy. Like I know so many people who live in their heads, reliving the violence, right? How do we take that out? How do we just say, okay, it's whatever you have experienced, like I am sorry you have experienced it. No one deserves to experience it. You will be okay from it. You will heal from it. And like fundamentally, one of my values are like, I fundamentally believe that survivors are the most resilient people I know because we are out on the other side of something. Even if we're in the muck of our trauma, we are still out of it, right? Like we're out of the thing. Even if we're living in the thing, we're still, getting through it day to day. But just being able to build community is critical to healing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So honestly, thank you for all of the work that you were doing with Saki and beyond. It's just absolutely critical. It's just so critical. Really, really inspired by you and could keep talking to you all day.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for this incredible moment. What you're building is just so beautiful, and I believe in survivor power, and like it just resonates so deeply. And so thank you so, so much for what you're doing. It is bringing light to like the space of injustice. Yeah.
Thank you. It was just truly such an honor to have you here. And thank you for being just so open and vulnerable with us as well. It means so much. And I know we're connecting over Zoom and we're not even looking, it doesn't even look like we're looking at each other.
It's fine.
Like to have connected on this level. Just really, really appreciate your time and you being here.
Of course, of course. Thank you for having Saki, and thank you for thinking of Saki, and thank you for having me.
Oh my
It's
gosh, of
great.
course. Well, I know I'm wrapping us up, but before we go, is there anything that you want to leave people with as we wrap this up?
I would say if there's someone in your life who is experiencing violence and they disclose it to you, the first thing you say is, I'm so sorry that you are experiencing that. How can I support you? What does help look like to you? Do not say, I wish I knew or I did not know. Or don't make it about you, right? Just, I know that's obvious, but, and then if someone you know is experiencing harm, please call our helpline, 212-868-6741. And it's available 6 days a week, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. And so, folks, and then if you don't get a call, we always call back within like 24 hours, if it's outside of those hours. But, and the number one thing for someone who is experiencing violence is to try to figure out a safety plan. Even if you're not ready to leave, think about your safety plan.
Thank you. Really.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And
Of
we
course.
really appreciate it.
Of course.
Really appreciate you. Thank you so much for
Thank
joining
you.
today.
Thank you for
Kavita.
joining.
Bye. Thank you.
Take care. Wow. That was beautiful. I love that conversation about accountability and justice. And it kind of got my brain thinking, why are we using accountability as a word? Should our word be, and it just kind of, should our word be justice? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like a good vulnerable place to talk a little bit about
Absolutely.
that. We chose accountability, honestly, probably because it's so siloed and specific to this like legal world that I'm in, because it's a part of and crucially only a part of a holistic look at what it means to heal and to step into your power as a survivor. But I love that framing of justice that she put.
I do too. I love that justice incorporates in accountability and healing.
Yes.
As well.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's a play on words that, we have accountability and we have healing.
Right.
But I love encompassing that word justice.
I mean, it's so true, right? Because the legal system does something, but very, very small. Look, and you know, I talked a lot about, I made a tongue in cheek about definitions and da, da,
Yeah.
and there is some value. Of course, there's real value in putting something into law, in defining something,
Yes.
in naming something, right? And that's a lot of what, you know, the legal world looks at. And that's so crucially important. And it's such a small part of what it means as a survivor to move into being able to finally step into and own your inherent power every day, right? But that's
Yeah.
it's such a small part of it. It's such a small part.
The smallest part for so many people
And the
because
legal
it's often re-traumatizing
Yes.
and it takes years
Yes.
and it often gets you nowhere.
Yeah. You know, you think about these like definitions as a whole. Okay, yes. And then you think about, okay, these individual people going through the legal system. Oh my gosh, where, you know, a lot of times people are not trauma informed. They have no idea what it means to talk to a survivor. How do you talk to a survivor? It can be re-traumatizing. It can be just really horrific. And we've seen in the media many times now in the last few years, it becomes this media circus almost. And to have your story be put out into the world in a way that's not on your own terms, it's just very re-traumatizing and very problematic in many
I
ways.
agree. And it's very re-traumatizing and that you have no control again.
So yeah, exactly. Oh, I loved that conversation about justice accountability. What does that look like? How do those interact? And you know, I also loved that, you know, it's been a day focused on intention, right? Leading from here with intention. And I loved when Kavita was talking about how when you talk about a survivor justice movement that is gender inclusive, if you lead with the intention of survivor healing, everything falls into place, right? All of your programming is already inclusive because you are leading with an intention of healing.
Yes.
I just loved that. I thought that was so beautiful.
I thought that was extremely beautiful as well. How she worded that and how,
Wow, we are so lucky to have been joined by Kavita. She's just absolutely incredible. And
the way that she was able to define everything as well.
Absolutely amazing. And we are